Well, hello, everybody. We appreciate you being here. Please mute your microphones if they are not muted already, and we'll get started right away. So this session is a special subset of the Vertical Presents webinar program, which delivers webinars that are informative in nature and are designed to help you learn more about the many facets of communications. You can see the webinar schedule by visiting vertical.com and clicking on the Resources tab. A few housekeeping items. Please keep your microphone muted for the entire session. If you do have a question, you're welcome to enter it in the chat function. Questions will be added in during or following the discussion. You can also email us today at vmarketing@vertical.com, or anytime you have a question, you're welcome to contact us. Today's session will be recorded, and we will send you the link to the recording so that you can review the sections and share with your colleagues. You can also access it by visiting our Vertical Presents homepage. So welcome, everybody. I'm Fran Blackburn, Vice President of Consultant Marketing for Vertical Communications, and I'll be your host today. Welcome to our expert panel discussion on guaranteeing a successful phone system implementation. We're so glad that you're here. It's my pleasure to introduce our three panelists, each with well over 20 years of experience in the industry. Our first panelist is Beth English. Beth is the Principal Consultant at EE & Associates. Beth has long-term domestic and international experience, an emphasis on emerging technologies, and a solid underpinning in legacy technologies. Our next panelist is Dave Jacobs. He's Principal Consultant at TechKnowledge. Dave specializes in telecommunications, physical and logical network design, audio and visual systems, security systems, and IT infrastructure. Our third panelist is Blair Pleasant, President and Principal Analyst at ComFusion. As an industry analyst, she understands the market dynamics and challenges in our industry and provides an objective perspective and insights to her clients. And one more final reminder, please keep your microphone muted, and here we go. Let's start with Blair. Blair, what are the critical parts of a phone system implementation?
Thanks, Fran. Well, as some of you know, my big focus is user adoption and training. So I think the most critical part of implementation is actually what happens before implementation. You have to make sure that you get the right system or service in place and that it provides the capabilities and functionality that you need. Otherwise, people aren't going to use it. And that's really the key, is to make sure that the users are going to use it and not use older tools or maybe some of the free stuff that they have access to. And it's really all about getting a system that meets your business goals, and business goals is what's key. Just getting technology for technology's sake doesn't make sense. So it's important to identify what you're trying to accomplish with the phone system, especially when we're talking about like unified communications and more enhanced capabilities. So, are you trying to make your salespeople more effective? Are you trying to reduce the sales cycle? If you're an insurance company, are you trying to reduce the time it takes to process a claim? So really think about what you're trying to accomplish and make sure that the solution has the capabilities that you need to meet your goals. And you have to think about that before implementation, otherwise it's too late.
Really good point. Timing is everything. Beth, Dave, do you have anything else to add?
Well, I completely concur with Blair that the successful implementation starts well before even the solution is selected. And one of the things that we've found is a lot of times we'll be going through a process, we'll get an engagement, and we'll be talking to end users and stakeholders and trying to do some needs analysis, and we'll be going through the process, and we get pretty far down the road, and somebody in the C-suite says, well, here's our new direction. You may have been thinking we were going to do premises, but now really the direction is cloud, and you may have to restart that. Or perhaps you have a process that's defined as, let's go through looking at some vendors, and then we're going to down select, and maybe somebody at the upper level says, well, instead of down selecting, we really want to get to the finalists right away. Or perhaps the business unit itself that's running the contact center, or that's actually using the contact center solution, has some very specific integrations with some CRM. And so all of those need to be considered very early in the process.
Thank you. Dave, anything else? You're unmuted.
Thank you. I agree 100%. If it's all in the planning and if it's done well, then the actual cutover is dull as dirt.
Good point. All right, let's go to let's go to Beth on this one. So when you refer to preparing your phone system for a phone system implementation, what does that mean and what are the steps?
That's a great question, Fran. And, going back to the previous comments about really good preparation prior to even selecting a solution, some of the key components are really understanding what your requirements are, looking at what your architectures are, and for example, you need to start collecting early in the process. You need to understand what your inventory is, what your users are, what their needs are, as well as what your existing infrastructure is and what your architecture is. And so that's even kind of pre-procurement is engaging the stakeholders and the people that will ultimately be using the solution. Another step that's really important is, for example, doing a network assessment. Make sure before you're putting a voice system over an existing local area, wide area network that you have the appropriate circuits and bandwidth and routing and all of that in place to make it work. And then understanding who's doing what parts of the tasks. For example, during an implementation, there's a process of you've got to go out and gather your existing requirements. What station numbers do you have? What sets do you have today? What groups work together? Who needs to work together? And so part of that implementation process includes gathering that information. So it's really important as part of the contracting process to define who's doing that work. Is that a spreadsheet that gets sent to the customer? Is there a customer contact that is responsible for gathering that information? Is that a collaborative effort between the customer and the vendor? And then as well, if you're implementing a brand new great solution, let's say we're going to cloud and we've got this great new forward-thinking transformational platform, and we go ahead and we put things on it that are configured and architected exactly as they are in the old solution. So to take advantage of all of the new technology and the new architecture that's going in requires a lot of thought around what you really want it to do and how you can transform your organization as part of the process. Obviously, I could talk for a long time on this, so I'll take a break and let somebody else jump in.
Thanks, Beth. Great input. Dave, anything else to add on that one? A lot of detail.
It's human nature to replicate what we know. And if you transition, for example, to a platform like this and simply replicate what you know, there's so many opportunities lost. So that's the number one recommendation I would have is you need a team that's going to look at it and have some fresh thinking on the configuration.
Really good point, which brings us to our next question. What people do you need involved for a phone system implementation?
It's very much a team sport. We normally recommend clients have a team of no more than 6, but we recommend that the IT people need to be involved, preferably having already been trained on the product, so that they can coach the departments on how to make best use of the offering. We also like to see an executive sponsor who is empowered to help departments see new uses for the equipment. The administrators and the console operators are a great resource, particularly the console operators will know the areas of heaviest calling that might be a candidate for some sort of a change, such as contact center. But you ultimately need one quarterback on the field, one person who owns the outcome and coordinates with the team and sees the entire field of play.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on that one. One of the other things that we've seen as well, often in a contact center, you have an integration with a CRM solution like an SAP or a Salesforce. So one of the key players on the team is going to be the person responsible for your CRM solution to make sure that that gets integrated at the front end as well.
Yeah, and if I can add, I actually just did a virtual event this morning for human resources professionals, and they really have a key role to play in this. And we don't think about that as much, but HR really, it's very important to get them involved as well. And also internal marketing, going back to what I was saying about user adoption and training, getting internal marketing people who can, help get people excited about what's going on is very helpful too.
And that's great. It brings us to our next point. How do you engage these people? Get their buy-in and get them prepared, Blair.
Yeah, that is so key. We talked about doing things, early on. So first, I think the first thing, and Beth kind of touched on this, is, survey your end users, talk to them about what they'd like in the new system. There've actually been studies that showed that when people are consulted before a new phone system is deployed, they're more willing to use it and adopt it. And this one study, let me find it, said 72% of employees who are consulted feel that their tools make them more productive, and that's compared to 54% who don't. So it really is important to get those end users involved in the decision. And when I talk about user adoption, I always talk about how important it is to have that sponsorship team that Dave talked about, and include those people and get those power users, and really also get the C-level people involved. Because a lot of this is about leading by example. So having those C-level people, using video, using team collaboration. There's stories about, CEOs who said, if you want to talk to me, then you need to reach me by video, because that's the only way I'm going to be connected. And if anyone sends me an email, I'm just going to ignore it. You need to reach me, using the team collaboration chat. So it really is important to get those C-level people to be involved. And what I brought up earlier also about internal marketing, that is just so crucial. Really get your internal marketing people involved in campaigns to help get people ready for the new system. And you want to build excitement. You have to reduce that resistance and build excitement. So companies have done things like, they have adoption campaigns with posters and videos and road trips, which we can't do right now, but newsletters, digital billboards, really getting people excited and involved so that they know it's coming, so they're not freaked out when all of a sudden, oh my God, I have to use this team collaboration that I never used before. Really get people ready and get them excited about it.
Great points. Anybody else to add to that one?
Well, I was thinking about one of the methodologies where you get a sort of a guru. I remember a project we were on where they assigned a telephone guru, and you got a little plaque if you were the telephone guru. And having those actually in the department helps create excitement. And also having people from those user groups on your project team so they get excited in advance about it and they become part of the solution and they feel like they're involved even in the selection process.
People like that visibility and they like to win. That's pretty neat. Anything else? All right, let's go on to the next one. So Beth, what does a project plan entail for this? And what steps are required?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so one of the things that we always recommend is that the vendor will have a project manager that represents the vendor's interest and manages the project from their perspective. But we always recommend that the customer has a customer advocate focused project manager. And there may be several parts to the project plan. Some are the steps the vendor is doing, and some are the steps that the customer is required to do. And it's really important to marry those two so that both interests get represented. And so part of that plan is drawing up a RACI chart. Who's responsible for what at what time? Who's putting the phones on the desk? Where does the list of end users get sent? Who signs off on that? Who's responsible for gathering and reviewing that information? Who's doing the network assessment? Because if you're moving on to a cloud platform, a network assessment is critical to the process. Who's doing the site surveys to make sure that the closets are set up the way they need to be set up? And again, part of the project implementation team should include, for example, somebody who's familiar with your Active Directory forest, who can help with those integrations. Somebody who's familiar with the CRM portion of the solution. So whatever the key components are that are going to integrate and be part of the process, make sure that you have team members from that process on the team. And make sure that there's a customer project manager in addition to the vendor project manager.
So you need to get the right people involved and make sure there aren't any blind spots. This is all critical information. Anything else to add to that?
Well, I would go back to what we were talking about earlier, knowing why you're deploying the system. understanding your goals and what you're trying to accomplish, and really focusing on those business goals that you want. So identify them early on, and then measure later. Try to identify, are you meeting those goals? And then if you're not, use analytics and try to understand, what people aren't using. Maybe get an understanding for why they're not using it, and then try to adjust the plan to get people more involved so that they are using those. So understanding what your goals are, and then measuring against that, and then going back and optimizing to try to meet those goals.
Yeah, and one other thing that who's a key player on the team is from the vendor side to have a system engineer participating for when questions come up on that side. And I think we talked a little bit about stakeholders, but some of the other decisions that need to be made early in the process are, for example, are you going to do a phased cutover? Are you going to go department by department? How many people are going to cut over at one time? How frequently can you space these apart? Can you do one every day? Do you have to wait for some time in between? At what point are you going to port the DIDs? Are you going to port them per group as they cut over? Are you going to leave them in place until the end? Does that mean that you need tie trunks between the two groups? So all of those questions really need to be thought out in advance and planned strategically. And along with that, as Blair was saying, timing the training at the correct time. You could do the training and they don't cut over for a month, and somebody's then forgotten everything. They get to the desk the day and they're trying to answer the phone, and they get really frustrated because they can't remember how to answer the phone. So the timing of the training is really critical, which Blair, you talked about with user adoption.
Yep.
Excellent. Let's move to Dave. Why is professional project management critical for phone system implementation? How does it contribute to a success?
Well, it's something most people do once or twice in their career, and you've got to have a knowledgeable team leader. A strong vendor can sometimes provide you that person. Other times, I think it's better to have a third party or an executive leading the effort. But it's very important for people to do the fact gathering and not just replicate what we have today, but also keep everybody apprised of the process and give them the timing on what's going to take place and what their role in that will be.
Great point. Okay, let's go to Beth. Is there any equipment that's required for a successful phone system implementation?
Well, in the old days, we used to think things like this were very important. We all had our butt sets and our hard hats. So today's infrastructure is quite different, and as we say, focused more on information than physical objects. So the type of equipment that's required is really dependent on the architecture. For example, do you need gateways for analog devices? What's your failover strategy? Do you have enough PoE switches? What are you going to do with a conference room? Are we going to leave them analog, or are we going to put in IP phones? So those are the types of equipment decisions that need to be made. But one of my favorite tools for deploying any project is to have a shared collaboration space. As was mentioned earlier, sending emails around or having multiple versions of a document can really stonewall a project when you have multiple versions of the same document, or which cut sheet is accurate, or what's the current project plan. So we always recommend that there's a shared collaboration space where everybody can get to the documentation and communicate easily with each other.
Dave, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's got it.
Okay, great. Although your hard hat was probably not pink.
Actually, it was. Mary Kay Cosmetics is a client, and we were the technology consultant on a new headquarters for them years ago. And to see all these big burly construction types on the project with a pink hard hat was hysterical.
And it was a certain shade of pink for sure.
It was.
Wow. So Blair, let's go back to, what are the biggest mistakes companies make when it comes to user adoption?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake is ignoring user adoption. we all remember from, the Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. And that's what a lot of people think about when it comes to user adoption. But you really do have to have a strategy and a program for it. A lot of times user adoption can be as low as 20%. And it's because companies don't have the proper training and they don't do that internal marketing we were talking about. And what happens is without that proper training, people might get frustrated with using the tools because they don't know how to do it. And then they're going to go back to the tools that they were using, that they were more comfortable with. And a lot of IT organizations, they measure success based on how well they implemented or deployed the technology and not what comes after the technology. So it really is as important to focus, have equal focus and emphasis on the implementation and on the adoption. So it's just critical to have that user adoption plan and strategy and not just think about adoption as an afterthought, and also have budget for training. A lot of times I hear about companies that just, it's not part of their plan. And then when it comes time to training, it's like, oops, can't do it. So again, it's all that pre-planning. I think that's the theme of what we're all saying today. Have everything, think about things before so that you can do things the right way when it's time for it.
And being aware of what all those things are. You guys are a great big help. This is incredible. Great information. Okay, Dave, let's go to you. What are your recommendations for training employees when implementing a new system?
Training has historically been a challenge because in the old days, when you told someone they needed to go to telephone training, the answer was, "I'll thank you not to waste my time showing me how to use the telephone." That's less of a problem these days with fully featured functions like the unified communication we're using today. Most people are excited to learn about it and really want to understand it so that they can get to use it. So I think in-person training, live training with the key admins, key department heads, the console operator, those people should be trained first. Those are the people who are going to identify any problem areas or things that need to be reconfigured. But you also want some project champions to talk about how great this offering is and encourage everyone else to come to training. The other thing we would encourage clients to do is record a training session and put it on their server for new employees or if someone needs a refresher. That's a great resource. And a lot of products like 8x8 do have built-in video tutorials. But the video tutorial is a little different than hands-on training and being able to answer questions. So I agree with Beth completely. It's essential to have that in your budget.
Excellent.
Yeah, I can add on to this for hours because this is one of my favorite topics. But I think when we think about training, we also have to think about not just how to use the tools, but also why you're using them and how it's going to help people, do their day-to-day jobs and make them more productive and effective. People want to understand what's in it for me and why they should be using these tools. The other thing is, those of us who are parents, I think we know that there's different types of learning styles, my son learns very differently than my daughter and I learn differently from them. So I think it's important to have different tools available and different types of training. So like I like to read something, other people like to watch something, other people, need that tactile, hands-on. So give options to people. And then food is always good, lunch and learns with pizza or, that kind of thing. You want people to go there, not so reluctantly. So again, it's trying to make it engaging and trying to do what you can to make people want to do the training because it is so important.
Excellent. Excellent, everybody. And I don't see any questions in the chat. If you have any questions, go ahead and add those in. We'll do more of I was going to say a lightning round, but you can add as much as you want to. We're ahead of schedule. So let's start with Beth. And as far as any advice that you'd like our audience to take away from this session, what would that be?
Number one, that there should always be a client-side project manager. I was just thinking about what Blair was talking about with training. We often see that it's overlooked in the contract. So if you're planning to include some level of in-person live training, that needs to be included in the contract up front and defined who is going to do that. We had a client say, as they were doing a phased rollout, this is a global rollout, and they said they picked the first location because in that particular country, people happen to be generally happy. So they picked that as their first deployment site, and they took the whole project team to that country to see how that went. And then that project team went on to do the other countries. So thinking creatively is important as well.
Interesting. Good points. All right. Blair, how about you?
Yeah, for me, it's, focus on your people as much as you focus on the technology. Because again, if your people aren't going to use it, you're not going to get the value out of your technology. So, we talked about talking to your end users and get the line of business people involved. It could be nurses, bank tellers, insurance agents. It's not just the IT people and, certain groups of people, but you need to really get all different types of users involved. Dave mentioned admins before. I've heard stories about admins who, they weren't consulted before getting a new system. And, there were people who had been using, *9, for the last 20 years to do something. And then the new system didn't have that. And they're like, well, forget it. I'm not using this. So it really, so it really is important to get that input. Again, the more you can talk to your users and, all types and get their input before, the more problems you're going to avoid later on.
Great. How about you, Dave? What would you leave us with?
For me, vendor selection is far more important than product selection. There are a lot of good products on the market. There are plenty of strong vendors. The challenge we sometimes see is someone who was primarily in another business, like audiovisual, for example. And oh, by the way, we now sell telephone equipment. So I'd want to know the vendor's team. Are they telephony heritage people, or is there real skill somewhere else? I would also want to know the vendor's experience with the product. I certainly don't want to be there first, but I would look for somebody who has experience with the product and a significant telephony staff.
Great advice. Thank you. Well, thank you to everyone. We still don't have questions in the chat, so you've done a great job of covering everything and opening some information we didn't realize we needed to know. So a special thank you to our panelists and to everyone in attendance. If there's something that was mentioned on the call that you're interested in, please reach out to Vertical. We can help get you in touch with these expert panelists and help you find a solution. You can contact us at vmarketing@vertical.com or call 614-965-6400. As a reminder, this discussion was recorded. You'll receive a link to the recording in the inbox for your reference or to share in the future. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. Have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you, Fran.
Bye, thanks.